So the United States and Europe wanted their Klaus Schwab Great Reset, but boy, they weren't expecting this. Little did they know that they'd be getting it much sooner than they bargained for, but not in the way that they actually planned. In fact, Russia and China just pushed the button on the Great Reset, and the West is in deep, deep trouble. I'm going to go through all of the latest data that's out this morning and a bunch of news for what's in store for us in a moment. Some of it's actually pretty jaw-dropping, and there's a lot to cover. But first, did you know that we're at war with China? Oh yeah, according to our members of Congress who just got back from Taiwan yesterday, we're at war with China, so we better get prepared. Here's Representative Tony Gonzalez, who just returned from Taiwan, where we just sent a whole bunch of weapons.
My first question is for you, General. I just got back from a trip from Taiwan. It's the second trip to Taiwan in the past 14 months. I spent 20 years in the military, as my good friend August Pfluger pointed out, our chairman pointed out. I know what war looks like. We're at war. I mean, this is a war.
What the hell? I mean, really? So who the heck voted for a war against China? Did you? I didn't. Do these people even understand what they're saying? The deep state is actively pushing for war with China as the U.S. dollar continues its downward spiral. Did you hear about the runs on the banks on Friday? Yeah, banks collapsing, people losing their money in the banks in the United States.
Yesterday, some of the biggest banks in this country, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, collectively lost more than $50 billion in market value in one day.
Here's Representative Chris Stewart this week calling for the abolition of the one China policy, meaning Taiwan is not part of China anymore, and that's enough to provoke China into a war with the United States that we will not win. Watch this.
Times are different now. If we're going to deter, I think we have to be clear in saying, yes, we will defend Taiwan militarily if we have to.
Well, this is all happening for a reason. They're scared shitless about what Russia and China are doing, which is building an economic behemoth that the West cannot compete with. Get ready for war. That's what a top U.S. general is now telling his troops, to get ready for war by the year 2025. General Minihan sent a letter to his troops telling them, hey, you better get ready. Now, even before we blew up their natural gas pipeline, they were building that coalition to dethrone the United States' dollar dominance. And historically, the way that we deal with people like this is we threaten war, and we actually try to destabilize these countries through regime change and sanctions, like we're doing in Ukraine right now to Russia. And now we're about to do the very same thing in Mexico. Earlier this week, Mexico announced its intent to join Russia and China as part of the BRICS nations. Holy crap! Our neighbor Mexico, the country we've been exploiting for years, a country we invaded and took their land in the 1840s, they finally had enough of our bullying garbage and is starting to stand its ground, wants to align their currency and trade with China and Russia. Now, I would say Mexico has a plethora of trading options.
What is a plethora?
Why, Wapo?
Well, you told me I have a plethora.
And then just like that, a plethora of U.S. congressmen started talking about invading Mexico with U.S. military forces. Here's Gringo, Lindsey Graham, Ukraine's favorite senator, introducing legislation to invade Mexico.
I'm going to introduce legislation, Jesse, to make certain Mexican drug cartels, foreign terrorist organizations under U.S. law, and set the stage to use military force if necessary to protect America from being poisoned by things coming out of Mexico.
These people are insane. And then, not to be outdone, is Congressman Dan Crenshaw calling for U.S. military in Mexico.
Hoy quiero dirigir este mensaje al presidente de México, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Señor presidente, usted recientemente criticó mi plan para autorizar la fuerza militar contra los carteles.
So watch as we alienate our closest allies, like we just did with the Nord Stream pipeline destruction. This week we saw the greatest pile of propaganda we've seen in a long time, and it had to do with the Nord Stream pipeline. First, the New York Times ran a propaganda piece saying this week that they can now confirm that a pro-Ukrainian group carried out the pipeline attack. Pro-Ukrainian, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, know what I mean? AKA the CIA and the United States. And then, not to be outdone, a German newspaper followed up like good state-run media does and said, yes, it was a pro-Ukrainian group, and they even identified the yacht that these people used to blow up the pipeline. Yeah, this is the yacht called the Andromeda, according to the German newspaper, which might be the most amazing pile of garbage I've ever seen if it wasn't so sad that they actually think we'd believe them. Can you imagine there's people actually reading these newspapers and believing this garbage? They think you're stupid. We know that 500 kilograms of explosives were used to blow up the pipeline, according to Seymour Hersh. which if you put that much weight on this boat, it would sink the boat to the bottom of the ocean. But don't get too caught up in the details. As journalist Aaron Mate writes about this yacht, to whoever is doing the Nord Stream cover-up, first, I don't envy you, tough job. Second, why not find a bigger boat, one that could conceivably carry the hundreds of pounds of explosives needed to blow up a heavily fortified deep-sea pipeline in multiple areas? Great point. Next, Europe is trying to desperately downplay the Nord Stream attack because it portends something much bigger, an energy great reset for Europe. And this is something that Europe wanted, but they wanted to do it on their own terms, eliminating combustion engine cars by 2035. Now that calendar has been accelerated, eliminating oil and natural gas, turning off nuclear power plants, then moving towards solar and wind completely. They thought that Russia would come crawling back crying, begging for Europe to take their natural gas. Instead, Putin and China just flipped a big freaking switch and shifted those resources into BRICS nations. They're not coming back crying, begging, take our natural gas, please. You know, you blew up our pipeline, but we'd really like to sell it to you. Indonesia, do you need cheap oil and gas from Russia? We've got it. What about you, Mexico? What about you, China? And that's exactly what just happened. Yesterday, we got word that Russia and China have just hit a new trade record, unlike anything we've ever seen before. And new customs data out this week shows that Russia and China are on pace to hit $200 billion this year. That's up 31% over last year. Now, why on earth would Russia go back to providing oil and natural gas to Europe when they're actively sending weapons to attack Russia? The answer is they will not. And if that's not bad enough news for the United States, here's this today. The Chinese yuan currency has outperformed the dollar by volume of trading on the Moscow exchange for the first time on record. Yeah, that just happened. Based on data from the Moscow exchange, the Chinese yuan was the most traded currency in February, displacing the US dollar from the top spot. And we got our clearest indication from China this week, right from the mouth of their president Xi Jinping, that they are not going to take this any longer from the United States, that they view what the United States is doing to their country as suppression of China. During his speech this week, he said, quote, Western countries led by the United States have implemented all-around containment, encirclement, and suppression against us, bringing unprecedentedly severe challenges to our country's development. When have you ever heard a Chinese president talk that way? The answer is you haven't, they don't, this is unprecedented. So the biggest supplier of cheap natural gas just vanished from the European market, and the effects of this are now starting to show even during this mild winter. Now remember, the real story will be next winter when all of their backup supplies are gone. Now that Russia's natural gas is gone, Bloomberg reports that the energy crisis will cost Germany $1 trillion. Send that bill to the United States. And because of Russia's gas restrictions, we've seen the largest inflationary shock in Europe since World War II, even beating the 1970s oil crisis, if you can believe that. Also this week, we learned that Germany is warning of electrical outages. According to the newspaper Welt am Sonntag, Germany should expect power cuts, that over the next 2 years, they won't be able to handle the extra load to the power grid now that their supplies have been cut, unless they can get new forms of cheap energy, new forms of cheap natural gas, which we'll actually get to in a minute. And just this morning, Bloomberg reporting that energy prices are soaring across Europe. Gas futures up 21%, which is the most since June. This will destroy lives and it will destroy businesses.